Pornography doesn't just give you something to look at. It actually rewires how you see. It literally distorts your desires. What should be rooted in connection, commitment, and reality gets shaped into consumption, fast, artificial, and disposable. Instead of seeing a woman as someone that you need to get to know and build with, you start seeing them as something to use and to move past. That distortion, it doesn't just stay on the screen. It follows you into real life. It weakens your discipline because every time you give in, you're training yourself to take the easy path instead of the right one. Discipline is built when we say, we've got to say no to what pulls us off track. That's when we build discipline. But pornography, it trains you to say yes quickly, quietly, and repeatedly. So when it's time for you to lead, to endure, to stay focused, you actually start to fill the gap. It's not because you're incapable, but because you've been reinforcing the wrong pattern. And it reshapes intimacy, literally rewiring your brain and trains you to take the easy route. See, real intimacy requires presence, patience, and selflessness. But pornography trains the opposite. It conditions you to expect stimulation without effort, connection without responsibility, and satisfaction without giving anything of yourself. This is a great distortion. So when you step into a real relationship, it can feel slower, harder, and sometimes even frustrating. And it's not because something's wrong with her, but because something's been trained in you. Now let me slow this down for a second. This is not about shame. This is not a shame conversation. This conversation is about clarity. But because some people are their mind is foggy with regarding this specific thing. If you don't see what you're doing or what's happening to you, you won't fight it correctly. You cannot build a strong life on top of an undisciplined desire. You just can't. You can't say you want to be reliable, focused, and grounded, then keep feeding something that literally weakens your ability to say no. That's the contradiction. And at some point, you have to stop explaining it away by telling yourself stuff like, it's normal, or everyone does it, or it's not that serious. Because the truth is, that's justification. And that justification, it keeps you stuck. The question is this: are you going to let it control you? Or are you going to take that ground back? Because the reality is, this is a war, and the battleground is your mind. So how do you fight this? What should you do? Well, you've got to start simple. You start direct. First, you've got to call it what it is. Stop using soft language. Stop saying stuff like struggling or slipping or just a habit. You say it plainly. You say, this is controlling me. This is weakening me. Because as long as you minimize it, you will not confront it. Write it down if you have to. You say it out loud if you have to. Clarity is not just mental. It needs to be verbal and defined. And that's where your leverage actually begins at. You've got to clarify, you've got to see it. Second, you interrupt the pattern. You already know what your trigger points are. It's late at night, alone, phone in hand. So don't act surprised when it shows up. That urge, that pressure. Instead, you've got to prepare for it. You put barriers in place before that moment even hits. You move your phone out of reach when you go to bed. Use app blockers if you have to, or accountability software. Change your environment when that urge hits. Stand up, go for a walk, go for a drive, leave the room. And when that urge comes, because it will, you don't negotiate with it. You move immediately. Delay, it kills discipline. Action builds it. You're not trying to feel strong. You're training yourself to act strong, to actually be strong. And third, you replace. You don't just remove. You got to replace it. You've got to change your focus onto something else. If you just cut it out and leave a void, it'll come back. In other words, what I mean is this. There's something going on. There's a space that is filled in your mind. You've got to replace that with something else. You need a replacement behavior. And a lot of times when somebody is struggling with stuff like cigarettes, years ago they would give them like a device that kind of simulated the same thing because it was replacing the actual behavior. And so you've got to replace those urges when that urge hits, that energy that comes over you. You've got to replace that with something else. You've got to redirect it. You can do something physical. Do some push-ups. Go for a walk. Lift some weights. Do something like that. See, that energy when it comes over you, you've got to direct it somewhere. You've got to use that energy in a different place. Use it for something constructive. Do something structured, like read scriptures or journal or review your goals. Or you can also do something spiritual, like pray for strength. I'm going to ask you to pray for every man who sees this message, so that we can have an unseen community of men who's strengthening each other without even realizing it. I want you to pray for every man who watches this video. Pray for him. Everybody. A wide prayer. Because that prayer, it casts a net and it spiritually strengthens everyone who watches this video. So pray for every man who watches this, even if they're struggling or not. Because even if they're not struggling, it doesn't mean that they're not under attack in some other kind of way that has nuances of this very thing.